Coming up on Why Should I Trust You? Are our schools making our kids sick? Now, we're not talking about asbestos, mold, or those sad cafeteria sloppy joes. We're talking about the time our kids spend inside school all day. Yes, that means a lot of testing, standardized testing, but it's not just the exams or prep. It's a school day in 2025 that would be nearly unrecognizable to most parents. Laptops open all day. Less than 20 minutes for a less than nutritious lunch. Little unstructured time to socialize. Fewer actual books assigned. And more class time swallowed up by test prep. For some kids, it's stressful. For others, school has quietly become a depressing ordeal. Now, you might be thinking, look, it's school. It's supposed to be hard. There are tests and that's life. We're falling behind. Kids need to work harder. There need to be standards. All fair, and there is a good debate to be had about the standardized testing movement. But what if we told you that scores for many of these students are falling as rates of ADHD, anxiety, and depression are soaring? Today, we speak with the New York Times writer whose piece sparked this episode. Is the school experience of today impacting our kids' struggles with mental health? If yes, why? And what realistically can parents do to help pull kids out of this spiral? And how much should this even be put on schools? And finally, is this one place where MAHA and public health might actually agree? Because we may be reaching a moment where more parents are fed up and ready to try something different. Let's get started. Hey, welcome back, everyone.
Yeah, welcome, everybody.
Hey, guys.
So this episode, I think, is going to hit home for me, maybe for you, Tom, because we are parents of school-age kids. And that's why when we saw an article in the New York Times titled, "America's Children Are Unwell, Are Schools Part of the Problem?" we were like, oh, yeah, we've got to get into this one. It was so provocative. So in a moment, we're going to be joined by the reporter on that one, the writer on that one, Lynn Yang. But first, who are we? I'm Brinda Adhikari.
Yeah, I'm Tom Johnson.
I'm Maggie Bartlett.
And I'm Dr. Mark Abdelmalek.
So yeah, Brinda and I are journalists, and as she mentioned, we're parents of some tweens, some teens. Maggie's a virologist with Johns Hopkins, Mark's a physician and a medical reporter, and this is Why Should I Trust You, which, as you know, is a podcast all about the breakdown in trust in health and science. And as many of you know, just a little plug here, we're not just a podcast. You can check out our Why Should I Trust You Substack page and just Google that combination of words and you're going to find us. We publish there weekly, including a brand new newsletter for those who sign up for the paid subscription that supports the work that we're doing here. And in that paid subscription, you're going to get a weekly forecast of what we're seeing, what we're hearing that's coming up in the near term, both in the world of MAHA and traditional public health. So please check that out and support us.
Yeah, man, please do check it out. It's got some like juicy nuggets that we're hearing, that we're picking up on from all kinds of places in the health space. And just a little bit more housekeeping. This episode that you're hearing today is going to be our last episode of 2025. We're going to take a little break for the holidays. The Why Should I Trust You team does need a little break. We love what we do for you, and we need a little break. And we're going to be right back after the new year. We already have some gangbuster episodes planned, so please stay tuned. Probably like first or second week in January, we'll let you know. Okay, so on to today's episode. So look, we know from our conversations that this issue of the mental health of our nation's teenagers is a huge deal for both MAHA and mainstream public health. And our guest has a really unique take on a big driver of that stress. And we'll introduce her in a moment. But Tom, help us get to speed. And I got to say, we're doing part of this deep dive a little bit differently today. I'm a little scared. Let's just say Mark, Maggie, and I are flying a little blind. Tom, what do you have cooking right now? I'm scared. Go.
All right. First of all, do you guys have a pen and a pad?
Yeah. So you told us to have a pen and I have a pencil.
A pen and a pad. The pencil.
I have my phone.
Number 2 pencil is good.
My phone is good.
Failed.
So high tech, Mark. So we're talking a lot about school and we're talking a lot about standardized testing. But today we're going to take our own standardized test.
Oh, geez.
I hate you,
wasn't
Tom.
given the materials to study.
I know.
I suck at testing, Tom.
Don't worry. Don't worry. Hopefully it's going to get us to a little bit of a better understanding about what school's like today and how it's changed since we were there, and a little bit about what might be driving some of this change. So I'll give you the questions, then we'll go through and tally up how we did. All right, question number 1. I might be starting out easy. We'll see. Which U.S. president received a report about America's public schools that said, quote, "For the first time in the history of our country, the educational skills of one generation will not surpass, will not equal, will not even approach those of their parents. It said that the educational foundations of the nation were eroding. And I'll give you a hint. That president called for the abolishment of the Department of Education as one of the solutions. Was it A, George W. Bush, B, Ronald Reagan, C, Donald Trump? Okay.
See, I thought this was going to be a real trick question where you're going to be like Taft or something. You know what I'm saying?
No, I'm not going to do that to you.
Oh, shit.
All
Okay.
right, don't say the answer. Just write it.
Is there a prize? I need to know if how much I should
Okay, wait,
effort I should
hold
put
on.
into
It's
this.
unclear.
Bush, Trump, or who was the other one? Bush, Trump, or who?
A, Bush,
Yeah.
B, Reagan, C, Trump.
All right. I feel
Okay.
like Tom
All
is
right,
being really
moving on.
sneaky right now.
Over the past 25 years, how many minutes per week would you guess have been cut from school recess? So this is minutes per week that have been cut from school recess.
Whoa.
Is it 30
From
minutes a
when?
week?
From when?
From 25 years ago until
Okay.
now. So was it 30 minutes a week have been cut out, 60 minutes a week have been cut out, or 15 minutes a week have been cut out of school recess?
Okay.
A, 30, B, 60, C, 15.
What is the typical length of a recess?
Well, you can't ask
Yeah,
questions.
you can't.
No
Yeah.
questions. I know the answer
To the
to
next
this,
question.
but go.
All right, number 3. Today, how long do elementary kids get for their lunch period? This is based on a one study. How long do they get for their lunch period? Elementary school. Is it A, 25 minutes, B, 30 minutes, C, 40 minutes? All right, number 4, talking ed tech. What percent of schools today issue a laptop or tablet to all of their students? A, 88%, B, 68%, C, 55%.
Okay.
Okay, 88, 68, 55. All right, number 5, 4 in 10 teachers.
I didn't sign up for this test. I'm just saying. I mean, I've taken enough
Mandatory.
tests. Okay.
4 in
Does
10
failing
teachers.
this mean we have to cancel the podcast? That's what
Yes,
I
it
want
does.
to know. Have we earned our
does.
right to be here? Go, Tom, number 5.
All right, 4 in 10 teachers said students spend how much of their school day on screens? And this is according to an informal survey done by the New York Times. So kids on screens during their school day, from the teacher's perspective. A, 1.5 hours a day. B, 2 hours of their school day. C, 3 or more hours of their school day spent on screens.
Okay.
All right. Number 6, true or false? 8 in 10 elementary school teachers in that same poll said that their district gives students an in-class device by the time they are in kindergarten.
Okay.
Got it.
Okay. 7, we're almost done. Another in another informal poll by the Times of teachers, what was the average number of full books? So think like Catcher in the Rye, The Outsiders, Great Gatsby. What was the number of full books that these teachers say they're assigning a year to their students? Is it A, 3 complete novels a year? B, 5 complete novels a year? C, 1 to 2 complete novels a year?
I just read this article, so I feel like I
Okay,
should-
well, you're going to get one right.
You prepared. Good job,
Yeah.
Brenda.
All right, final one. I took a little liberty on this one because I wasn't 100% sure when you guys graduated college, but here we go. And finally, the last time high school seniors' reading scores were this low, was it A, when Maggie was in college in the 2010s? B, when Brinda was in college in the 2000s? C, Tom was in college in the early 90s? When was the last time high school seniors' reading scores were this low? Okay, so how do we do? All right, which president said for the first time in history, our education system's basically not even approaching of those of our parents? What did you guys say?
I said Reagan. A.
Okay. Mark?
I said Reagan, which I think was B, but that's
B.
besides the point.
Maggie, how'd you do? What'd you say?
I thought it was Reagan, but I'm really bad at multiple choice. Would have preferred a written exam.
There you go.
And I knew Trump said to dissolve it. But I
So
was
you
said
went
Trump.
wrong. Yeah.
Okay, it was Reagan, 83. Big
Wow.
report. And it set into motion, by a lot of people's estimations, this whole modern sort of reform movement in public education, lay out standards, test to see if the schools get standards, either punish the schools if they don't or incentivize the schools if they do. Flash forward to No Child Left Behind with George W. Bush, same idea. Flash forward to, President Obama with the Common Core and Race to the Top, same idea. And there's a real debate about, whether that's working or has worked or has not worked. And having said that, our guest today, who we're going to meet in a moment, described this multi-decade period as a time when a metrics-obsessed regime was taking over American education and profoundly altering the expectations placed on children up and down the class ladder. In fact, it has altered the experience of childhood itself. So that's what we're going to get into. But again, let's keep going with our grading of our
Yeah, that was a
tests.
good one, Tom.
Yeah. Okay. So since 2001, how many minutes a week of recess have been cut? Did you guys say 30, 60, or 15?
30.
30?
15.
Maggie?
I said 60.
Maggie's right. It was 60 minutes.
60
week.
minutes have been
60
cut
minutes
from
per week.
recess?
Yes. Bad. I mean, if you're maxing out instruction time.
I
get
can't
the
tell my
scores
kids this
up.
because they will be like, what the? You've got what from who?
What did they have before? Okay,
All
number
they
three.
did was recess, it sounds like.
I know. Number three, what did that study find was the median length of elementary school students' lunch period? 25 minutes, 30 minutes, 40 minutes. For
I said
elementary
30.
schoolers. 30?
I said
Okay.
25.
25.
Okay. Yes, 25 was it. For middle and high schoolers, 30. And it was interesting. One researcher stood with a stopwatch and reported that kids at the end of the cafeteria line had only 10 minutes to eat, which we know is bad news for healthy eating.
That's crazy.
I can
socializing,
confirm this as the mother of a
digestion.
couple of cafeteria line stragglers.
Yeah, not good. Okay, number 4. What percent of schools today issue a laptop or tablet to students? Was it 88%, 68%, 55%?
I said B, 68%.
Okay.
That's
Mark,
B.
B68.
you're all wrong. 88%.
Oh, man.
We saw this
Wow.
take off during the pandemic, and it's only continued since then. 88%. All right. In
That
that
is
informal
surprising.
survey in the Times, 4 in 10 middle and high school teachers said students spent how much of their school day on screens? What did you guys say? How many
I
hours?
put 1.5 hours a day.
Okay.
I
Mark?
picked the highest, 3.
I
Had
picked
to
the
be.
highest.
You guys were right with the highest. 3 or more. I love the or more part of that.
Yeah.
What does that
I know
go
it's
up
like
to?
3 or 7.
Right. Okay. Number 6, true or false? 8 and 10 elementary school teachers said that in that informal survey in the Times that their students receive a device in kindergarten. True?
I
Okay.
put true.
I put true, but I don't believe it.
Okay.
I put
If it is true.
It is true. It is true. It is true. Kindergarten's changing. We're going to get into that with Gia Lynn. Okay. Books. How many books a year are these teachers who are surveyed saying they're assigning? And this is from beginning to end. Like, this is the book. We're doing Gatsby. We're doing it for 8 weeks, 6 weeks,
Yeah.
whatever. Like, how many books a year?
I put 3.
3. Mark?
I said 1 to 2.
Okay. Maggie?
That's what I said.
Yes, 1 to 2.
Hey,
And
I
it
read
really-
the article and I
Yeah,
was
that's-
still wrong.
That's too many books.
Yeah.
You
Wait,
don't need books.
Brinda.
You have like
Well, this is the
Roman.
whole, like, bite-sized readings,
Yeah.
excerpts, quickly answer questions, which is what, it's a standardized test, right? You're practicing. What's the point of a book? Okay. And then the last one, the last time American 12th graders reading scores were this low was Maggie in college in the 2010s, Brinda in college in the 2000s, or me in college in the early 90s?
Brinda 2000.
Brinda 2000s. Okay.
I put
Final
90s.
answer.
90s. Okay. Brinda or Maggie.
2000s.
Okay. It was 1992 when I was in
Oh.
college. Right. Yeah, so all groups of 12th graders, even, we're talking lower skilled readers, middle, all down, except for the top 10%. And it was the same for math, down compared to 2005 in math, except for that top 10%. Those top 10%'s up. Pretty interesting. All right, Mark, take it away.
Wow, Tom, I just got to
Oh.
slow clap that one a little bit because you did a really nice job of terrifying us and then
Yes.
Yep.
taking us on this
I'm so
educational journey.
sweaty.
I'm
Cut the
so
funding to
curious.
Mark.
Yeah, what our guest Jialin Yang would have gotten on that score, but we're going to meet her in a moment. But she argues that what's going on in school these days, the way the system has increasingly focused on testing and boosting student scores, all of that kind of thing may be playing a role in, believe it or not, our children's stress. We're having anxiety, we have an increasing number of mental health issues. So, of course, a lot of attention has been paid to the isolation and mental health issues and learning loss during the pandemic and school closures. We kind of have seen that trickle effect and what that means. We've also seen a lot of focus lately on phone addiction in schools, and some districts are making strides, successfully banning or reducing phone access during the day. And then last week we heard from Australia where they began enforcing a ban on kids under the age of 16 from accessing major social media platforms. I mean, would that ever even be considered here? But back to the phone bans in school. If you're quick to get behind those restrictions, it's not a panacea. First of all, while reducing phones in school might have educational benefits, there is research that suggests that just banning phones by themselves, it's not a silver bullet for, all of a sudden being, this wholesome, well-adjusted kid. A UK study of about 1,200 kids out just this year, I was so surprised by this, found very little difference in the mental well-being of kids who attended schools with restrictive phone bans versus the kids that didn't have. So that leads us to another focus right now. I mean, all those laptops and iPads that Tom talked about. We have, of course, seen studies that find that the more time teenagers spend on screens, which is probably one of the reasons why Australia made that decision, the more likely they are to be inactive, get irregular sleep at night, be overweight and experience issues with, like we said, anxiety and depression. So one piece of research is very revealing. In a large study, each additional hour of screen time in early childhood was linked to about a 10% lower chance of scoring at a higher level on a standardized reading and math test later on. So again, the more time you spend on the phone, the less scores you get. So now we're not saying that this is a cause and effect relationship, and we haven't studied it in a way to be able to say that, but of course, we're focused here on health and not academics. But that's striking, especially if it turns out to be because of the screens. No, our focus today is on what's happening during the school day. We keep telling all these kids, look, screens are bad, but at the same time, like, we're handing them out. Our school is full of technology and full of pressure. And how is that impacting kids' mental health? Now, we know that 32% of teens have met the bar for an anxiety disorder at some point in their lifetime. There's an early childhood spike, around ages 5 to 6, which is the most common single age that anxiety first shows up. It's not the median age. That usually happens around 11, but you can see things as early as 5. And like you expect, kids around 11 start to talk about having anxiety. And, this kind of sets them up for an adolescence that could be a little bit turbulent. Some estimates peg the number of 12 to 17-year-olds who have experienced a major depressive disorder at 1 in 5. That's 20%. And as for feelings towards school, nobody likes school, I guess. A study by researchers at Yale found that 75% of students self-reported their feelings related to school as negative. Is that because of some combination of, shortened social time, less resource? Is it the increased use of screens? Is it, just all these tests that they feel pressure to take and the teachers are only teaching to the tests? Or is it pressures just around the test? Or is it just that everything is just more competitive now and kids are feeling that pressure by the time they hit high school? So we're going to get into all of this with our guests, and we can't wait to talk about it.
Okay, so that was a good setup. It felt like we just took an exam. Thank you, Tom, but it was a good one. And when we come back, Lynn Yang with the New York Times. Welcome back, and a big Why Should I Trust You welcome to Lynn Yang, the senior ideas writer at the New York Times, which is sounds like the coolest job ever. Her Times bio says Lynn seeks to bring context, especially by exploring history and intellectual debates that can help illuminate current events. I just have to say this piece for me was really provocative. It brought up a lot of thoughts, and I think it will for our listeners too. It's so great to have you here, Lynn.
It's great to be here with all of you.
So let's just start out with the thesis of your piece. I'm actually going to read the headline out loud again. America's children are unwell. Are schools part of the problem? Walk us through what you were saying.
I've been following this debate about, as you guys have been talking about children are unwell. There's all these diagnoses. There's kind of this fixation on COVID as the moment that kind of broke American childhood. We've heard a lot about the phones and the screens. It just struck me, I'm the parent of 2 small children, that somehow in this whole conversation, I wasn't really hearing about school itself, which is where kids spend usually most of their waking hours, not necessarily, but way up there, right? And if you have a child, you understand that the environment that they're in really affects how they feel, how they behave. And so how could we be talking about anxiety, ADHD, autism, all these various diagnoses without asking questions about school? And so I sort of began to look at the history of school, the history of childhood itself. And I was just struck at how much has changed since I was growing up, because I went to public schools in the US, 80s, 90s. And what I learned just really shocked me about how much we've changed what school really feels like for a kid, and in a way sets them up to learn or not learn.
Yeah, so tell us about some specific findings as it relates to, what you saw were like evidence to you that schools may be part of what's making kids unwell.
I think if you let's just look at ADHD diagnoses, right? Because that is just, those numbers are kind of shocking. At this point, I think 1 in 4 adolescent boys has at some point had an ADHD diagnosis. And you see them really start rising right around when you've got sort of the No Child Left Behind reforms coming in and all of this testing going on. And you see there's really powerful studies that show that states that begin to adopt these really kind of strict rules around funding based on test scores, they often see a real spike in ADHD diagnoses, especially among low-income kids. At the same time, if you're a school district with kind of, your scores aren't so great, some places can carve out kids with diagnoses. And that doesn't mean that, the schools are kind of foisting fake diagnoses on children. It just means there's a dynamic here where you're trying to get the test scores up. These diagnoses can kind of change how a child gets support. Maybe they don't get counted as much. Maybe a child can get medicated and suddenly they're not kind of misbehaving in the classroom and the whole classroom can run. But there's just kind of this pressure to perform. And as that's happening, you can see the diagnoses also going up. That's not to say that it's causing it. It's just that researchers who have looked at this or argue that you can't sort of separate these two as completely unrelated, because just as we see the diagnoses going up, school itself is changing so much. And I think if you talk to parents of kids with these diagnoses, often the first person who tells them there's a quote problem is the teacher. The teacher says, your kid can't sit still. They're acting out, they're misbehaving. And suddenly the parent, can be a terrifying experience. You're like, something's wrong with my kid. And you run out and get a diagnosis and maybe you get medicated and you're just sort of off to the races. But the beginning of that sort of signal that something is wrong is school.
Let me push you on that a little bit, Jillian. Like, how do you square that? The sort of understanding that these diagnoses unlock funding and more resources, and therefore an expanded definition of, say, autism. I mean, you in your article put that now that number has gone 1 in 31. It's a number that Secretary Kennedy brings up. But the sort of obvious answer to that is that they expanded the definition of autism. So now a lot more people who are on the sort of more functional end of that spectrum, they get the benefit of the resources that come out of that diagnosis. How do you account for expanded definitions that then afford people more resources with actual illness going up?
Those resources are totally critical for families, right? So if you have a kid diagnosed with autism, you want the occupational therapist, you want the accommodations in the classroom. What I think is interesting is that if you actually look at the diagnostic manual that the psychiatrists of America put together that define the diagnoses, something like autism and ADHD, there's no like blood test or like MRI that you take to know if you have it. So we're really basing it on behavior. And so how we decide who has this diagnosis and who doesn't can get very, I'd argue, sort of almost political, not in a partisan way, but people can kind of lobby. And what's really interesting to me about ASD diagnoses is that over time, parents have been lobbying the American Psychiatric Association to keep the definition broad enough so their kid can get diagnosed and get services. So just think about that, right? The child definitely needs the service, but why is the diagnostic criteria being influenced by what parents need for their kids in school, right? Again, it goes back to school. So that's telling you school is somehow, you could imagine, some people said to me, like, it's kind of an immovable object, right? Your kid just first of all, it's compulsory. You're breaking the law if your kid doesn't go. So you have to go. You have to achieve. Our economy now, very clearly, a college degree makes a huge difference. So there's all this pressure. Your kid's got to make school work. Your teacher says, we've got an issue here. It's not working. You will do anything in your power to get your kid help, right? And your kid hopefully gets the help. But at some point, you have to ask, what is the environment, again, that is immovable, I'd argue, in a lot of cases, that's sort of pushing people into a diagnosis. And so that's a dynamic, right? So instead of thinking school is a neutral territory and the child is disordered, we have to fix the kid, it's sort of a little bit of both, right? It's a little bit of column A, like, how can we support the child? And hopefully a column B of like, what is the school like, right? What is the classroom like? Because to your point on the top of the show about recess, a kid with ADHD who gets recess is a pretty different kid in the classroom than a kid who has very little recess, right? And is like running around, can't sit still. And we're asking even very small children to sit longer and longer and longer now. And so that mismatch of expectations, it just feels like when we're looking at the issue of these diagnoses, it feels like it would be very strange to me to not bring in. So what's happening in the classroom and how has that changed over time?
Yeah, and I just want to play up just something you just said there, which seems really interesting. That child who may be suffering from ADHD, is in a system now that is restricting, outdoor recess time because there needs to be more classroom time, which in some senses, not all senses, I mean, schools have local curriculums, things like that, but in some sense is being directed towards that big standardized test that's coming up, which is going to judge all of us in this school, all of us in this district. We need to show progress on these kind of benchmark tests. It's kind of like converting a child into that child becomes like a data point, like a data creator for the school to be judged rather than what is just best for this child to learn, right? I mean, is that part of like the wider thesis of what's going on here?
Yes. And I think, I heard from so many people after this piece came out, and there was a teacher I'll never forget. She said, the problem with the system is that I feel like the kids can make me look bad or they can make me look good. And so that's a very different dynamic from you're a child,
Wow. God, I wish I didn't hear that, Jillian. As a mom with kids at school.
Every kid is like a potential demerit, right? Or like a good. And think about real estate values are now attached to these test scores, right? When you look up, am I in a quote good school district? You're basing that on, there's that Great Schools company that sort of compiles it. If you look up a house, right? You're like shopping for just browsing real estate. There's always like a ranking of how good the schools are. That's based on the test score. So all these things are now hanging on whether this one child, all these children collectively can perform. And I think the thing to think about to me is that beyond just the world of like ADHD or ASD or anxiety, if you're making it feel like there's all this pressure, we're taking out recess, we're just trying to get you to get a better test score, that actually might be totally backfiring and making it ironically harder to get the higher test score. A country like Finland, which people love to study, is kind of a nice alternative. And it is interesting. They have much higher test scores. They also don't test as often. And they're training their teachers more. So they're kind of looking at the learning environment first, right? Put the test scores aside. Just think about, is this a classroom conducive to learning, reading, and math, and all the other subjects? And how do we train teachers to respond to kids, educate them properly? And then occasionally, we'll just do a test to see how it goes. I think in this country, it's become much more like test much more often, right? We're just going to keep taking the temperature, see like, is it better now? Is it better now? Like all over and over. And then the learning, it begins to sort of distort what the learning is. I think the people who wanted to do the reforms, very well meaning accountability. Who doesn't want accountability, right? You want to know if your kid is learning, but there's a point at which you're measuring so much, right? You're kind of testing so much that it changes how the teaching itself is happening. And I think, people who are really education experts, some of them are suggesting, when I talk to them, that this is really counterproductive. Like this is actually making it harder to learn. So the more you kind of drill and try to teach the tests, the harder it is for kids to actually get the education that we say we want to give them.
Does that mean, Jillian, that we're saying that in some ways, like academic rigor and children's mental health sort of can't be on the same playing field? And what I mean when I say that is, around the same time that your piece came out, another piece came out in the New York Times talking about how kids aren't really reading books anymore in school, or they're reading way fewer. And I'm here to tell you, to confirm that is indeed the case with my middle schooler. I'm not even sure she's been assigned a single book. But all that to say that, like, how do we square kids are getting stressed out, there's so many tests, with kids aren't performing well on these standardized tests, and we are not assigning them books, and the academic standards are so much lower than other countries? Like, does there appear to be, I want to borrow a phrase from a friend, some like rhetorical confusion? Are we conflating the success and the health conversation a little bit?
So this is how I would think about it. If we just step away from like pedagogy, like reading, math, just like step way back and kind of imagine for yourself the kind of environment that you, even as an adult, tend to learn and thrive better in, right? So if you think about school as a parent, I want my kids, I want them to learn how to read and do math, right? All of that. But really fundamentally for a child to learn, they have to love learning, right? They have to feel comfortable in the classroom and feel like they belong and people want them there and have an environment that feels like they're cared for. Like put aside again the testing, right? Just to the precursor for learning. And I think especially for small children, they just have to feel like it's a nice place to be. And if you can't feel like it's a nice place to be, right? If you feel like you're a failure or you're just bad at this thing, or you just don't feel right in your body because you're just sitting for long hours, it's really hard to learn. So I think what's interesting about all these reforms is if you look at preschool and kindergarten, those ages totally changed. So kindergarten is from, it's the German for garden for children. It's supposed to be this like very, in the original conception, very playful prep for schooling later. And now if you have a kid, you may have heard, a small child, you may have heard words like kindergarten prep, right? Like, or ready for kindergarten, redshirting kids for kindergarten. I don't know if you guys heard this.
Oh,
like,
yeah. Big topic.
The last time I heard that was about Division I college athletes. How can we be talking about redshirting with small children? And so the reason is the expectations of kindergarten have gotten higher and higher and higher. So when Common Core comes in the mid-aughts under President Obama, and they really begin to tie funding to that new national standard of Common Core. Common Core adds sort of this standard across the country that by the end of kindergarten, your kid needs to read at a certain level. Now, back to Finland, those kids that's not really happening until they're like 7. And so there's a range at which children learn how to read. And I spoke to a number of reading experts. I mean, you want to stay on top of your kid's ability to do it. But if your kid can't read by the time they're 6, it's also going to be okay, right? Like you're not automatically going to fail at school for life. And so once they did that to kindergarten, preschool got different too, right? Preschool became about how do I prepare you for kindergarten? And then preschoolers are now having to sit for longer because they have to learn their letters. They got to be ready for, kindergarten. I was shocked to learn how many children are just expelled from preschool constantly. And I have friends whose kids have been expelled from multiple preschools.
Oh my God.
Yeah. The expectation is totally mismatched with actual childhood development. Right? The expectation is we got to get you ready for kindergarten. You need to sit here. And I think these poor teachers are often not highly trained. Think about the childcare system in our country, right? These are often like people who are not being paid enough. These schools have very thin profit margins as it is. They can barely stay open. They're not necessarily training people on our latest understanding of childhood development. So somehow school has become, okay, preschool, you got to get ready for kindergarten. Kindergarten, you're here to get ready for, the rest of elementary school. Then it's middle school, you got to be ready. Then you got to get ready for high school and you got ready for college. And it's just this constant tier of expectations. And I think just looking at younger children, of course, we want them to succeed. Of course, we hope that they can go to college. But does it actually help a small child to learn, to make them sit in one place for much longer than they can handle, and then have their very first experience of school feel like one where they're maybe failing, they're not having fun, they're not enjoying it? And so there's just something about that again is, Brinda, to get to your question again, in a long way, does that really set somebody up to learn how to read if they're just actually having an unpleasant time? And when I think about myself, like for me to learn and get excited about learning a new thing, I need to not feel like, there's all this pressure on me. Like the environment's got to be a certain way. And not to say like everything needs to be, super like touchy feely and there's no rigor. But in a way, we've sort of lost the rigor of what we know about childhood development.
I'm trying to imagine like, my time in those days, are we like romanticizing the like 1980s schooling? Like it was just so perfect. We had everything great. I mean, obviously we've made some advancements like in the last 20 years. I mean, we talked about like early intervention and speech services and individualized like learning plans and IEPs and how that's all helped. But like, at the same time back then, like the high school graduation rate wasn't as high. Isn't that true? I mean, it was much lower than it is now. Like, how do we do all the things that we need to do? Is there like a special sauce that you figured out that can do these things, but still keep our stress levels, anxiety levels? I mean, we said 1 in 5 kids have some sort of major depressive episode, and like, a shocking number of kids have anxiety. Like, what can we do to achieve these like higher achieving things without labeling kids as bad, or they just were pushed out, or they're lazy and that's why they're not behaving? But we can still like accomplish some of this stuff without like scoring really high marks on this stress and anxiety tests.
Yes, I want to be clear that school has not, it's compulsory. You have to go. Like, people are not, I would not say like, I happen to enjoy school enough, to do okay in it, but that's not everybody's experience. And it's not new for people to really hate being in school. That said, I think that the amount of pressure for kids, it's at this point, that whole step ladder that I was just describing of like, get into kindergarten, they get into da, da, da. Can you imagine your child? And it's like, we've sort of told children that like your entire future is riding on, and economic stability is riding on whether you can succeed right now. And so I think the place to start, and the experts I talked to who I thought were just really thoughtful, was like, again, step way back. In a way, you kind of want to hear more from kids and students about what they're experiencing. One of the weirder things I think that's happened is I heard after the piece came out from parents who said, my daughter comes back from middle school. She has like 7 different teachers. They all give her the assignments on different like apps and like digital forms. The rules are different in every class. She has to keep track of so many things. And this is just kind of madness. Like, every time she comes home, we have to sit down and sort of sort through just almost the administrative task of figuring out what the homework is and like who gave what, in a way that tells me that like we're not hearing enough from students of like, when you add all these things up, right? You take away time for lunch, you take away recess, every teacher's kind of in their lane assigning something. What is the sum total of this experience for a student, right? And so one woman I talked to said she actually has adults sort of shadow students just to see like, what is it actually like to be in high school right now? Because I think it's easy for adults to not quite understand like what we're asking kids to do. And immediately, if you do that in some schools, you'll see you're asking a kid to switch like subjects every hour. There's a new thing coming, new rules. We talk about executive functioning skills. It's very hard to do executive functioning in this kind of a situation. And I would defy an adult to describe a job that actually feels like that, where you have like 7 different bosses, 20 minutes at most to eat your lunch, no time to move around, and like constant rules, right? And measurement. And like, is that really setting a kid up to learn? Just start with that baseline question. Is this an environment that really feels like it's going to let a kid sink into learning how to read, sink into learning how to do math? And if you haven't established that foundation, it's just very hard to imagine how you're going to have children properly educated.
I want to pull you back to the mental health piece too for a moment. We talked about, the Chromebooks in school notion. It seems, just sitting here, that during the pandemic, kids had their, heads buried into their laptop. That's, that was the school experience for a lot of kids for, certain chunks of the pandemic. And it was depressing, and it was isolating, and it was just not a lot of fun. It was really, really tough. We go back to school. We accelerate what? We accelerate Chromebooks, laptops for students in the classrooms. So we've sort of taken a little bit of the thing that we hated about the pandemic schooling, and we've gone back to school, but now we've brought that thing into the school, into the classroom in a more pronounced way. And you've got kids who are learning, staring into their Chromebooks in the middle of a class. Like, I just wonder, like, how much do you think that is contributing to whether it's anxiety, depression, or just that kind of that I think it was like a Yale study that just said kids they're just bummed out by school. It's just I guess it's kind of lost that social thing that made high school tolerable in the 80s when we all went. It was kind of fun on some level. Things sucked, but it was kind of fun. Like, how much do you think is just being sucked? The life is being sucked out by our increasing push into technology in classrooms.
Yeah, I think it's a piece of the puzzle that we have to look at, right? Because it's easy to sort of treat technology. I feel like this country is really into thinking about technology as always offering us a potential solution and not sort of thinking through, is there harm being done by adding this? Is this really just gonna like, are we just sort of adding in new factors? And you see why, I mean, you can imagine why teachers do it, right? They're trying to teach the test. There's all these companies that sell curricula, sell them the technology. I'm not a teacher myself, but you can imagine if you've got screens, maybe easier to manage the
Or they're
behavior.
being told this is what you have to do. This is the curriculum. You must teach with this program that we purchased, and we're all going to do it at all grades. Yeah.
And that I think is one pretty big difference from when I was growing up. Teachers, I think, genuinely had more freedom to say, okay, today we're not feeling this. We're gonna adjust. It's less standardized in every way, not just the testing, but the curricula itself. You know, the thing about learning how to read, if we just think about that alone, which is its own crisis, which is its own like multiple, podcast episodes talk about crisis of trust and expertise, is that learning how to read is also about the social environment, right? It's about, for young children, actually, oddly enough, it's to learn how to read, you also need to be playing, which sounds like it's not really work. But for childhood development, play is really critical for learning. In our adult years, we're like, playtime, that's not work time. You're not going to learn if you're playing. But for children, their growing brains, play is really important. So even having a child learn how to read properly, you're not, the Chromebook in kindergarten. I mean, that is pushing out time to interact with peers, do imaginative play. Reading is a really fine art. You have to set up a feeling of, you're interacting with adults, you're hearing a lot of language, right? You're like talking to other kids, you're talking with the teacher. All of that kind of language rich environment is how you read. So it's again, it takes highly trained teachers to do this. It's not just, okay, we got to read, here are some books, sit here and now do it. It's a whole kind of environment you have to build to let a kid really learn to love how to read and to then actually learn how to do it.
But we're coming down on we're cutting recess and we want more play in school. We want more kids to have more fun in school. But at the same time, we hear reports like, oh, I don't know the numbers, but our math scores aren't great. Our reading scores aren't great. So we have parents who are saying, oh, I want more academic rigor too. But isn't the conflict just inevitable? How do you play more and learn more math?
Yeah, they're if you've ever watched a truly gifted preschool teacher, absolutely know how to do this.
So the conflict is not inevitable, is what you're saying.
Really, and in fact, we get lost if we think of play and movement as antithetical to rigor and learning. I'm saying that actually, if you talk to childhood development experts, these are actually the foundations for learning. If you don't let a child move around, they're not going to learn.
Even in an under-resourced public school where you need, you don't have a lot of resources. So this teacher you described as oh, today I'm not feeling this and we're going to do something different. But does that set up for problems, right? So you have these underfunded schools, under-resourced schools that you're taking away the kind of the standards that have gotten us to an acceptable level.
Can I ask, I think you're getting at a really important point. And Jillian, it's the conversation around the sort of where this concern is coming from. And I'm sure you've heard this, and I wonder what you say in response, which is on some level, is this fundamentally an upper to rich people problem in a way that we think about the sort of really specific needs of our children and not enough. And again, this actually gets into public health language a little bit, not enough in terms of population health, which is you need basic standard education and standardized tests to be able to hit as many kids as possible. We are an enormous country. We're not Finland. We're not these sort of really small societies where they're homogenous and they can kind of be more experimental in their ways. New York City alone has over 1 million kids in its public school system. How do you approach the criticism that these are rich people problems ultimately?
I think it's quite the opposite. So if you look at preschool expulsions, those are poor Black kids being expelled from preschool. If you look at the ADHD diagnosis spike that I talked about under No Child Left Behind, those were low-income kids. The people who can get the IEPs, get the diagnoses, those are the people with money. But everybody else, their kids are getting kicked out of school, frankly. It's just not working. And so again, to step away from the rigor versus gentleness kind of dynamic where if you're too gentle, they're not going to learn enough. Are you actually just imagine a child from a poor family, right? They're expelled from preschool out of the gate. That's their first experience of education. They already feel like a failure. Their parents are just like, we don't know what to do, right? So already there's like high stress for like a 3-year-old, right? This person is like they're really, really supposed to be just playing. Okay, there's no point in teaching that child reading and math at that age. So that's right out of the gate what's happening. Then they get into, okay, now you're in elementary school, more, behavioral problems, right? Your child has already been labeled a problem child. These are the kids who stop showing up in school altogether. We have a huge chronic absenteeism problem, and many of those kids have special needs and disabilities. And so at that point, they're not learning anything. Like there's just kind of no way. And I just think there's a gradient of like that child and then all the way up to the parents with money getting the diagnosis, but all of them, something isn't fitting, right? Their kid just somehow cannot find a classroom where they feel confident to learn, and they are being truly cared for. I mean, there are plenty of teachers who are phenomenal, but there are a lot of parents who are in this position, which is why you see more kids homeschooling. Like you'll hear from Black families that are homeschooling because the school just sort of gave up on their child, especially boys. Black boys just gave up on them altogether. And now they're homeschooling, or they are now doing things called microschooling, right? Which kind of came up during COVID, these small learning pods. And these families are desperate. They would rather be at their public school, but something about the school is just making it impossible for their kids to learn, right? So these are not parents trying to like go easy. They would love for it to work in the classroom, but something about school feels like this kind of immovable object where no IEP can get you out of the scale of what's going on. And I just, over the years, if you sort of begin to talk to parents in that world, it is really, really difficult. And they are people who want to, speaking of trust, they want to trust the public school system. They never dreamt in a million years they'd be homeschooling their child. But this is kind of what the system has left them to do because no one will, in a way, the school system has given up on educating their children.
I have to just say I love that answer because I think in some ways, like I asked that question knowing that that's what a lot of people may say, but personally, I think the whole like population health needs a different approach. It feels paternalistic, if I'm being honest. And so I appreciate what you're saying. Tom, I think you had something.
Yeah, and I can also see sort of a flip side of this, which is you have teachers, you have principals who are triaging and pulling off miracles with at-risk kids, getting them meals, getting them notebooks, being there, when things are really rough. And yet that school is getting a bad mark because the standardized test scores came back and the kids didn't show improvement as versus the kids 3 years ago. So it's like, I think what you're describing is a system where it's like there's lines and you need to be inside the lines. And if you're outside the lines, working over here, trying to do something different, or over here trying to triage kids in crisis, because the school is the only touchstone for them in their community, then that school is deemed as a failure when they're actually could potentially be performing miracles. Like that's a whole nother side to this.
Right. And we know that the test scores are so closely, I mean, speaking of class and income, you live in a rich suburb, your school's going to be okay. You're going to have a good rating. We're not talking about whether the teachers are better or worse. You're talking about the entire socioeconomic environment for the kid. And I think that's where I feel for the teachers, right? Imagine a classroom. Okay, everybody gets an IEP. Suddenly your class, let's say you have 32 kids. The first 3 kids have an IEP, then 4, then 5. I mean, how are you supposed to manage a class with that many IEPs? And that's, again, where I would just point to exploring. I know this is like out of the box, but like, look at the whole environment of the school. What can you do with just adding recess that might avoid having to add like 10 more IEPs? Because the IEPs and all these services are also breaking local budgets. I mean, it is really expensive to do all this. Thankfully, our country, we have relatively new civil rights laws that protect children with disabilities to receive. They are all entitled to a free public education. But I don't know that just adding a million more IEPs is going to get you there because it's just sort of unwieldy. And so why not look at, again, the whole thing, right? Like why does the teacher feel like they can't be flexible when flexibility is everything for a situation like this? And is there something we can do? What happens if you add back recess? do as many kids with ADHD, do as many kids even get diagnosed with ADHD? There's an incredible study of people who are diagnosed with ADHD they grow up, they are young adults, they're in the working world. The symptoms basically vanish. And that is really clear point. Like it sort of sends you a signal of like, they have their temperament. They're probably not the person that you want to like run all of your administrative tasks, right? That's like ADHD. But when they get to be an adult and they can self-direct, right? They're really excited about one subject that they do. And they're not asked to, go from one class to the next with all these homework assignments they have to track and no recess and no movement. They're fine.
It is a theme that we've heard. We've heard about bringing back presidential fitness tests. Remember, you would sit down and can you touch your toes and how many whatever it is that you could do. And you've talked about so many things that could go better in school, basically. And the piece was fascinating. I mean, do you ever worry though that like a critique like this is weaponized in some way? Because we're hearing so many things of like dismantling public education, rather than like these like simple steps that you've just outlined to improve it. Like, I mean, we even have the Secretary of Education literally calling for the shutting down and winding down of the Department of Education. Like if you look at like the budget request that they've put in, I mean, it literally is like who asked for less money? I mean, they're saying we want to have like 15% less money than we had before, which, presumably that money is used to do the things that might make schools better. Like, how do you tackle that? How do you square that? The fact that you're putting out this like critique, and could that be weaponized to actually harm schools?
I think the trouble is that people are already leaving their school systems. Trust is being broken every time a child is basically unable to be educated because they have one of these disorders. So it basically means that I think, yes, the right is making this argument, but there are people who are not terribly political who are waiting for someone to notice that they can't get their kid educated and they're desperate. And right now, the only people who seem to hear that and say, here's another way to do this, it's coming from the right. And so I think the piece is trying to say, like, let's sort of depoliticize this, right? Let's just figure out why people who are not political, again, they want to be in public schools. They're not Christian nationalists, right? They're not trying to have the Bible. They're just trying to get their kid educated. Let's listen to those people a little bit to see what's going on, because their experience is making them no longer trust the public school system. And that is not good for anyone who believes that our democracy needs to have a free public education for all children, right? And that is a really powerful, bold, progressive vision. But it is not served if more and more families feel like, oh my gosh, my kid just can't be educated, right? They're not trying to be conservative, but they're sort of in that. I think this is, you guys know this better than I do, but like this is how MAHA happens, right? People are kind of like, wait, I'm up against this problem. No one seems to be hearing me. Oh, over there, they seem to be hearing me. And it's a person maybe with a larger political agenda, but it's just a parent and a child who just can't figure out a way for school to feel okay for them.
But if you cut the Department of Education, does that mean there's less enforcement of IEPs and like there's less tracking of that? Is that one of the ramifications? So it's...
Yes, there's a civil rights division. I think people in this world will not say, I mean, the IEP, those are broken every day, constantly. So it's not like I would say the Department of Education is sort of like this bulwark, and with them, IEPs are being followed and kids are being educated. This is why kids are homeschooling. Like, that's why parents are homeschooling. They're going to micro schools. The IEPs are often not working. People have to hire expensive lawyers to enforce them. So it's better than nothing, right? If you're going to have a civil rights law protecting kids with disabilities, better to have someone on the case than not. But it's not really working, right? Hence all these people leaving the public school system. And I just think each time that happens to a student, it happens to a family, it just harms the trust and faith in the public school system. And that's sort of fundamentally what's going on, right? Putting aside Trump and the politicization of public schools and the vouchers, every time a parent is like, wait a second, I thought we could go to the school and suddenly my kid's getting kicked out. I'm getting calls from the teachers and no one's helping us. We're drowning. That is just one less person who really believes in that dream of a public education for all.
Yeah, Jillian, I want to ask you kind of this final question, Jillian, which is like, if someone says to you, like, Jillian, you're like why you're putting so much pressure on the schools to be like the end all be all for these kids. These schools, these teachers are underpaid. They are not given enough support and resources. And why should it fall on them, even if it is many hours in a kid's day? Like, why can't we sort of spread the wealth in society for being all these people and not just teachers being the people that really show up in these kids' lives? What do you say to that?
I think the piece is, in a way, really not trying to blame any individual actor in what I think is a really kind of impossible system, right? I'm trying not to blame individual kids, certainly, individual parents, individual teachers. I think what's happened is that we've had national political leaders of both parties who've put in the system of reform, the Department of Education, right? Saying you got to hit these test scores. And again, I would even say well-intentioned. They want our schools to do well. But in setting that kind of really strict metric system that I'd argue is not necessarily can distort, right? Can distort how education feels. When you get all the way down into a classroom, it's not necessarily helping kids actually learn. Because once you tie your budget to, again, whether the kid performs, you're kind of doing something else. It's not really just kind of a pure education setting anymore. And so I guess, like, in my mind, to be more hopeful about it and not just say, oh my gosh, it's just a mess, we just have to walk away. Like, what would it take to reimagine school where when kids are asked, how do you feel in school, they have a positive emotion? I don't think any adult wants to feel like school is a place that's where kids feel bad about themselves, right? And just start from there. Like, what would it take? What would happen if we just interviewed kids about, like, what is it like for you? Right? Like, instead of us saying we got to compete with Singapore with these math scores, like all these adults being like, we're falling behind, just put that to the side. Yes, we're not as good as Singapore as math. Just get back to the basics. How are kids doing? And how do we have schools basically do no harm? I mean, if we have people going in and feeling like failures, I just don't think that's good for our society. That can't be what we want, right? To me, maybe this is just me, and I, as a parent, I don't know what you're going to get if you get your kid all riled up and anxious and like diagnosed. Like, is that really what we're looking for? And to what end? So they can get into college. I'll just say there was one woman who wrote in after the piece. She said, she's like, my kids are neurotypical. And I could tell that there was so much homework, and I just made them do the homework every night. We got into vicious fights every night until they both hated me. And now they're in a great college, but we were all broken by the experience. And so I think everybody from, like, it's amazing to me. This whole thing is quite universal. It's like every class of person is affected, low income to high income, neurodivergent, neurotypical. There are just a lot of people who are just not actually, I think we're not thinking enough about how kids are doing just in this place that we send them to every day, that we have to send them to. And until we take that head on, which I realize is quite large, and give teachers and administrators support, not just pressure, but support to create schools that they actually probably have way better ideas, frankly, than random Congress people. Until we actually think about that, I just think we're caught in a loop where schools are not serving way too many children of all kinds in this country.
Wow. Jia-Lin Yang, I just want to say, this piece was a really important piece. And I think it's unlocked a conversation in our country that is necessary. It might be difficult for people to hear, but it's an important one. And I don't know about you guys, but boy, are there so many parallels in these other conversations we have on this show about the sort of right approach to dealing with populations in America who may be nervous about certain medical interventions, who aren't trusting a system, who aren't maybe always seeing the system as there to serve them.
Deferring institutional reforms until
the right team is in charge.
In power, and they're going to take it a different direction or accelerate in the direction that we're going in. Like,
right.
That's all here too. It's
definitely here. So I just want to thank Jia-Lin for joining us on Why Should I Trust You? Thank you so much, Jia-Lin.
It was a pleasure to be here. I'm so glad that the piece was thought-provoking. That was really
It really was.
It really was. So that was Jia-Lin Yang, senior ideas writer at the New York Times. Please send us questions, comments at questions@whyshoulditrustyou.net. So as a reminder, we're going to take a 2-week break. I hope you forgive us, but we're going to chill And we're going to be back at it in January. I am Brinda Adhikari. He is Dr. Mark. He is Tom Johnson. She is Dr. Maggie Bartlett. We hope you have a beautiful, happy, peaceful holiday season. And we will see you back here in 2026.
What?